Our next speaker is a very good friend, and he has been a frequent attendee at this conference, commentator, presenter for a long time. Rob Jackson is now on the SEC, SEC Commissioner. He was appointed by the President. It's been there a little over a year. His history is an interesting one and a great one. He has 2 college degrees, not 1 but 2, from University of Pennsylvania. A degree from the public policy degree and a law degree as well. He started his career at Wachtell Lipton in the executive comp area, and we first met just after he left that and was going to go to Columbia Law School about 10 years ago to teach at Columbia, but he decided not to do it, to take a sabbatical before he got his sabbatical, I guess. And he went to work for Ken Feinberg, and he was Ken Feinberg, the pay czar's deputy during the financial crisis. That's where we first met, in an ABA thing. He had just taken the job, and it began a phenomenal career, both in the academic sense and in the practical sense. He was really an integral part of what Feinberg did in regulating the pay of the heads of our largest financial institutions. But after that, he went back to Columbia, joined Columbia, and had a phenomenal run at Columbia as a corporate and securities law professor. His writings are terrific. As a scholar, he's tremendously respected. But beyond the scholarship, he is a very rare academic in the sense that he is a very practical academic. He has superb scholarly credentials, but he also has superb practical credentials, which makes his scholarship the more relevant and the more interesting. He then decided to move to NYU Law School. I guess they had better water down there. I don't know, Rob. Easier commute. But shortly after that was appointed to the SEC. And in my view, he is a phenomenally dynamic commissioner, but really the chief advocate, I believe, for investor rights and responsibilities that's out there. And having Rob, obviously, in the academic setting is important, but having him in the practical setting is, frankly, at this point, even more important, because I think he speaks for investors in ways that very few can. And he's probably also about the most entertaining speaker I think I've seen in the academic setting in a long time. So I only wish I had gone to Columbia a few years later and taken him. Anyway, now you'll have a chance to take a class from him for at least 40 minutes. With that, I introduce you to Commissioner Jackson. He wants me to sit with. Oh, really? Okay, I'll sit with you.
Well, thank you so much.
I'm his foil, right?
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I'm always a little embarrassed when people talk about my multiple degrees. My father likes to say that that's what happens when you subsidize something. I'm really. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to say. Thank you to Charles and to Indra for that wonderful conversation. Let's give her another round of applause. Really, one reason I love to come to this event, and I so enjoyed that conversation, is that I don't know how to do this job well without understanding what's happening in the boardroom and the marketplace. And I think the people in this room and Charles and those at the university who've been focusing on this program for years, really, I come here to get those insights, to hear what's happening in the boardroom and understand what's on your minds, so that it can inform my work. So I thought what I would do, as we discussed, is talk a little bit about 1 or 2 of the issues that I've been focused on at the SEC. And then, with your permission, I thought we'd just have a conversation. I'm happy to take any questions the audience might have on any of the subjects, either before the SEC or the ones we've spoken about. And I'll tell you why I want to do that rather than just speak at you. The value for me of coming here is to hear from all of you. I want to know what's top of mind for you. And so I thought I'd have a conversation rather than just give a speech at you. How's that sound? Yeah? All right, good. Good. I haven't said anything yet. Don't be so sure. Oh yeah, I heard you were really keen about my arrival.
Yes. Well, you know, the last time he was here, he was going to speak, and we like, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? And it turns out he went to the other building.
Yeah.
We couldn't find you.
I feel like nobody in this room is really that excited for the SEC to show up. Don't worry, I'm from the government. I'm here to help. Nothing to worry about. So a couple of quick things that I've been focused on. Then really, I'd like to just have a conversation. And one of the things that Charles and I have spoken about at length, and I'm very fortunate that I've known him for years, and he can advise me about the interventions I try to make as an SEC commissioner. One of the things I've been thinking about and focused on is the increasing use of dual-class stock in companies that are coming public. And I want to talk a little bit about, I've given a speech on this before, but I want to talk a little bit about the context for that and what's really worrying me. And that's not a problem for all of us to solve in this room today. It's not a problem, I think, in fact, as a matter of law, that the SEC can solve at the moment, but it is something we should talk about as a community of folks in the boardroom who care about the future of corporate America. So you have seen that there's an increasing set of firms that are going to go public. I think that's a very important development for our capital markets. I'm delighted to see companies accessing public capital. But a lot of them are adopting dual-class stock structures. And I want to say that, you know, the way I look at that and the conversations I've had in the boardroom are consistent with the notion that many folks in the boardroom are concerned about facing an activist or having to manage quarter to quarter, and they want structures to deal with that. And I want to start out by saying, I understand that. And I'm sensitive to that consideration. I understand why we need structures that achieve that. But I want to point out that what we've done as a matter of law and practice in the bar is created a bit of a binary set of outcomes where people either insist upon the IPO for hammerlock generation-to-generation control of the firm, or they come public with single class. And my push at the SEC has been to think of the subject in a little bit of a more nuanced way than that. So what I have said is that more and more we see companies coming public with not just dual class, but perpetual dual class, which provides for the founder's heirs to inherit not just the shares and financial rights of the firm, but perpetual control of the company. And this, to me, is a very puzzling development because, first of all, as a matter of ethos, it's a little bit strange to think of, the children of even the most brilliant founder of having hammerlock control over the firm forever. But even if you thought that was a good idea, and I don't, but even if I were convinced of that, the evidence suggests that dual class is the kind of governance device that works for a stated period early in the firm's. It's often very useful when a founder has a clear vision in the first 7, 10, 15 years after the offering, where they really need to make investments. A classic example to me is, and I gave this to my students to read, is the registration statement that Google put out when they decided to stay with dual class shares. And they explained that the invention of Android took years, and they bled cash and profit as they developed that platform and needed the control of dual class to do it. But I don't understand why intergenerational dual class control is a good thing. And one difficulty we have is that the SEC has previously tried to regulate this, and the DC Circuit has advised us rather impolitely that we lack the power to do it in the 1990 Business Roundtable decision. The consequence of that is that the only entities left, the only institutions left that can do that work are the stock exchanges, who have, in my humble view, more or less exited the corporate governance business for obvious financial reasons. What that leaves us with is the following dynamic, and I got to be honest, tell me if I'm wrong, but this really bothers, this kind of thing troubles me. What's happened is investors who are concerned about this have gone to the index providers, and they've said, we're concerned about this problem with perpetual dual-class stock. The index providers agree, and so they've made decisions like, for example, the decision to exclude newly public dual-class companies from those indices. And I'm worried about the following thing, folks. I'm worried that in 10 or 15 years, the great growth story of the next public company that comes public with dual class, whether it's Uber, whatever, none of us knows what it is, and that's part of what's exciting about being in the marketplace, is going to get left out of most Americans' portfolios because they're index investors, see? And ordinary American families are going to do the right thing. They're going to do the thing that my parents did that allowed me to be here, and they're going to put money in indices, and they're going to miss out on that growth story. And we're going to deepen the sense in this country that America's financial markets are built for somebody who's not the ordinary American saver and investor. And to me, this is to be avoided. And so I've been pushing at the SEC. I just want to be clear, not for rules that would limit the use of these things when folks come public, but would urge them to provide some kind of guiding principle or limitation. I don't think shareholders have to have a vote 15 minutes after you go public, but I do think at some point there should be a sunset or some moment of accountability to ordinary investors for companies coming public. And I think we can achieve the things we want with long-term investment in our economy without suggesting to ordinary Americans that intergenerational control of our biggest and most influential public companies is appropriate as a matter of corporate governance. So that's one thing I've talked about. I'm happy to talk more about it today. And the other thing I want to emphasize for you, and it's a speech I gave last year at Tulane's corporate law conference, is on the issue of cybersecurity. And this is an issue that I have been focused on from the very first day I walked in the door at the SEC. I know everyone in this room is thinking about it, because I don't think there's a boardroom in America, honestly, that isn't having a conversation about this risk. And one of the things I'm most concerned about when it comes to cyber is the degree to which the SEC's rules are giving boards and the marketplace the tools they need to have a conversation about the degree to which the data of the company and its security is at risk. And I want to say, for me, this is so pressing because it really is. Everyone I talk to in the boardroom tells me this is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year war. And the way I think about it, honestly, not just in my current job, but as a citizen, is it's a war against our way of life. It's a war against the ability of America's companies to use information about who we are in a way that lets them serve us best, but doesn't invade our privacy, which is a balance every company's been trying to strike for the last decade at least. And we're asking companies to fight this war on their own. And it is an extraordinary effort. I think well-governed boards are making enormous investments in these issues, and I want to encourage them to do that. My concern is that when a company is a victim of such a hack, when we get into the boardroom, there are members of that board who would really rather not disclose it. And look, I've been to that board meeting. I understand it, I really do. But the role of a regulator is to provide, I think, guidance to that conversation. So corporate counsel can sometimes give the hard advice that, hey, look, I understand this is going to be a long day, but the right thing to do is to tell the market about this. And when I gave my speech at Tulane last year, I did a little bit of an empirical study. I went through the Identity Theft Resource Center public database. And you guys might know that state and local law requires companies that are the victims of hacks often to report to the customers who are affected or to the Attorney General of the state details about what happened. And the Identity Theft Resource Center collects that information. So we scraped that information last year. And we looked for public companies. And then we just looked to see whether or not the public companies 8K'd the hack that they've been a victim of. Now, the thing to note here is that that information is already in the market, right? It's on the Identity Theft Resource Center webpage. The AG has it. The customers have it. It's already in the market. The question I was interested in is, did the companies 8K it? So in 2017, the first year we studied, we found that 97% of the time, companies didn't 8K that development. Now, look, the materiality judgment is a case-by-case careful judgment. I understand why corporate counsel might give that advice. Is 3% the right number? It sounds low to me, but my reaction was to say, look, let's see how the marketplace develops. Companies are trying to figure this out. Advisors are developing best practices. Let's give them some room to see how we're doing. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to the Wall Street Journal Chief Investment Officer Conference, and I updated the data for 2018. So I looked to see how has it changed. In 2017, 3% of the hacks got 8K'd. In 2018, 10% of the 8Ks got hacked. And the guy who was interviewing me said, Commissioner, that's great, we improved. And I said, no, man. I said, we're moving very slowly in an issue that's moving very quickly. And I've been prevailing upon my colleagues at the Commission to think about whether we should develop guidance or rules that nudge people in the direction of a required disclosure in this situation. Now, when I talk about that, people say, wait. These situations are complicated. We don't want to give hackers a roadmap to weakened companies. We don't want to give details that we don't fully understand. We don't want to, what if we don't know all the facts? And I guess what I'd say about that is, anyone who's ever filed an 8K or looked at the items they're under knows that there's a lot of flexibility in those rules. There are some bright line disclosures, like departure of directors, et cetera, but more or less, there's a lot of flexibility in those disclosures. And I wouldn't suggest that we have to mandate or write a rule that codifies every detail of that. That's never been our securities law. And the flexibility and principles-driven work in securities laws has always served the market well. What doesn't serve the market well is 90% of the time having information out there about a hack that investors don't have, and they're not provided by our rules. And let me say one more thing about this. When you create that kind of information asymmetry, when 10% of the market, when some of the market knows something and others don't, people trade on it. Like, that's price discovery. That's what a finance scholar will tell you. Why we want to create a situation where people can profitably trade on these developments is completely lost on me. That should not be a profitable investment strategy in my judgment. Instead, we should be encouraging boards to do the hard thing, the right thing, and get that information out there when it happens. I want to say one more thing about that, which is everything I've just said requires me to have the following philosophy, which is, if you come to us and do the right thing in a situation like this, we will not penalize, we at the SEC will do everything we can not to penalize the people who are trying to do the right thing. And I can assure you, I have a good working relationship with the chairman and with my colleagues. The terrific enforcement co-directors we have made a real effort to tell companies, if you come in and do the right thing, we are not going to use that as a political opportunity to hurt you. We're going to use it as a moment for a constructive dialogue about what happened and how people can be better prepared. And I think our enforcement division has done a good job of that. But I do think our rules right now are letting the market down, because we're putting boards in a situation where the lawyers can say, hey, 90% of the time you don't have to disclose this, so let's not. And my own view is that the world in which we live, these kinds of things don't stay secret for very long. There are no secrets about cybersecurity in the marketplace, not for long. And I would encourage all of you as your counseling boards to think about getting ahead of those issues. And I'm encouraging my colleagues to develop rules that would help you do that. So those are a couple of the things I've been thinking about, but I'm very, very happy to take any questions and have a conversation about what's on your mind.
I got a question, if I may. Do a class stock. You mentioned the idea of a sunset provision. And are we talking voluntary? Or are we talking, you obviously teach Delaware law, state corporate law. Should the change come about from the states and who regulate the capital structure of organizations, or should it simply come from the marketplace of ideas, so to speak, or the institutions who purchased the stock initially? It should be regulatory, state regulatory change. Can't be an SEC change, as you've discussed. Certainly, the exchanges aren't going to do anything. Should the state of Delaware, corporate committee of the state of Delaware, consider rethinking our enabling legislation?
I think they should consider it, but I would encourage them. Look, they've always been very good about this. I would encourage them to have a dialogue with the market about this. And I have to say, like, my original speech on this was, here was my pitch. And for some reason, like in Washington, this doesn't sell. But my view is, here's an idea. About this, let's do something other than nothing. And I feel like, that's like not, I don't know, is that an unreasonable bid, Charles? I don't know. Like, and the reaction I got was, well, markets. Atlas shrugged. Really? I mean, first of all, we're talking about IPO markets. So we can have a long conversation, if you like, about the efficiency or lack thereof in the IPO market in the United States. But the idea of efficient bargaining at this stage of the capital raising process, I mean, it's whatever. Also, look, I mean, the problem here is one of sort of an institutional vacuum. Like, I think the expectation as of the late 80s was that the SEC had the authority to do it. I know that was the expectation. A lot of lawyers at the SEC thought that was the case, and the DC Circuit disagreed. But what you created was a 20-year-long vacuum in the oversight of this issue. And I think, Charles, one of the key points in your question is that a lot of folks believe the stock exchanges might do something. After all, they had, right? But something happened. They went from collectively governed organizations in the mid-2000s to for-profit entities. And what they want to maximize is listings. I can't even blame them. Like, I'm a shareholder rights guy, right? I have to be for that, I think. So given that structure, I can't imagine either of them separately or collectively would take any step that might upset the people who are issuing shares in the United States. And for that reason, we can't expect them to do anything. So I think it might be time for the state.
For the state, yeah. Well, it was a very pointed question, by the way. Why don't you take your questions? I told you he was good.
You might get the impression I'm not long for politics. Trump, Tesla, bring it on. But I should say, I hate having to do this. These are only my views. These aren't the views of the chairman or my mother or anybody else. But I fully expect that just given a little more time and wisdom, they'll realize I was right all along. What's on your mind? Yeah.
Kevin McManus, Just Robinson. Quick question. Cybersecurity. You were talking about, maybe it should be disclosed. You were saying that maybe the proxy hacks or of individuals should be disclosed. Hasn't the market moved beyond that? I mean, this information is widely available with the right sources now. We put a full cyber security profile in every one of our reports practically. Our vendor has detailed data on everything from how their person's website is set up, are they using the right software, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, hasn't the market moved way beyond this?
I'd like to think so, man. I think it's a really good point. My question is, where is that information available? Like, can an ordinary investor go to Edgar and get it?
FactSet.
Oh, you want them to pay. So that's cool. I mean, you got to make money, right? I'm not against that. I'm really not. My question is, do we really want to put people in a situation where this kind of information, like I don't mind, like I used to use FactSet. I don't mind FactSet for truly sort of on the margin proprietary information. Do we want some people to be better informed than other people in the market about whether you got hit? Like is that a trade I want to be profitable? I don't, man. I don't. And the reason I don't is that that's a kind of story that leads ordinary investors to think this thing is rigged. Because people get to trade on, hey, I know you got hacked and the rest of the market doesn't, so I can be short and take advantage of longs. Like, that's just, in my view, that is a trade that the SEC should not favor. This is not an ordinary price discovery situation in my humble judgment. Now, let me just say, I want to be clear. The work he's talking about and the resources they're developing are so important because they help boards do this better and they help counterparties push boards to do this better. Like, I love the fact that that kind of information gets pushed on boards who are having this conversation. I'm interested in what's out in the marketplace for ordinary investors because I'm worried about asymmetry of that information. But hey, just my 2 cents. What do you think?
I'll tell my people. Maybe we can publish it for free. We'll see.
Wow, that was a quick negotiation. Man. Well, I'd be delighted, of course, if you did. And look, I just want to say the work you guys are doing, it's so important because the boardroom is telling me they're getting better resources on this every day. I think the market has moved forward. The question is the information we give in ordinary investors move forward? And I'm worried that it hasn't. Others? Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Melanie George Smith, I'm CEO of Sustainable World Strategies. I was wondering if you could talk to us about global sustainability and your views on that.
So for those of you who didn't hear, the question is, what are my views about global sustainability? It's going great. So a couple things. So first of all, I think hearing your comments earlier, hearing this conversation you had with Indra, I think well-governed boards, with exceptional leaders like you on them are thinking about these questions very hard. And I don't want to give that short shrift. Most American public companies that I talk to, that I've shared thoughts with, are having this conversation. And they're having the conversation in 2 ways. I think first, they're having a business conversation. There's a possibility of a shift in literally the environment in which we operate. What does that mean for us? What are our exposures? What real estate do we have that could be affected? What localities are we engaged in? What communities do we have a relation? What geographic areas of the nation are we in that might require more attention? And that's a very productive conversation. However, I do worry about something that I've been noticing, and I want to share this with you. And you mentioned this, I think, in your conversation a moment ago. I'm interested in the degree to which investors are requesting and getting information from companies about the risks they face in this area. And I think there's something happening that is worthy of all of our attention. So I had my economist a couple of weeks ago run a test, and there's this really exciting new data science kind of software that lets us take a look at the similarity of text in documents over time. So one thing I had this guy do is he pulled all the risk factors from 10Ks back in 2004, 2005, and then he pulled them from last year for the S&P 500. And what he found is that the risk factor text today is 3 times more similar than it was then. So it's a lot of boilerplate. And one of the things I worry about is that investors are asking for this stuff, and people are trending toward a boilerplate, one-size-fits-all type response, in part because it's safe. I mean, you can see what others are filing. You know our CorpFin staff will approve it. It's legally safe. But it's not the sort of detailed strategic thinking that we need about this subject. And I think there's a degree, by the way, to which boards feel, and I understand. They feel they're subject to a game of gotcha. They get asked a hard question, they do the thinking, they give an answer, and it's either not good enough or it's misinterpreted. And as a result, they just revert to boilerplate. And I'm worried about that, because I think we need, as a nation, as a society, to do better than boilerplate responses to sustainability questions. I think we need to get more detailed information. And I also, I'm going to say something I'm not sure you and your colleagues will agree, but I think investors need to not be submitting boilerplate proposals to companies, but instead need to drill down. This is what you said last year in your disclosure. This is a conversation we had. Tell us about the following 3 updates. Be specific. Ask for firm-specific strategic information about the changes in our environment and what it means for the company and its future. My sense is that most boards are happy to have that conversation, or want to have that conversation today. And they have gone from the sort of knee-jerk reaction to, let's exclude this proposal, let's hire a lawyer, let's get this dealt with, to actually let's talk about this and come up with an answer. So I think I'm hoping that that dialogue is going to continue to move forward in that sort of more specific way, and that the disclosure we get will be better. Because I think 10 years from now, we might look back at risk factor boilerplate on the environment and ask ourselves, what were we doing? Why weren't we having a more detailed and deep conversation about these issues? And I want to move us in that direction quickly, because I think time is of the essence. Others? Yeah.
Since we seem to be in the 7th year of the 2020 presidential campaign, I'm wondering what your thoughts were about the prospect for accountability and transparency in lobbying and corporate political spending.
It's an easy question.
So for those of you who didn't overhear, he's looking for me to get fired. So his question is, given that we're in the 7th year of the 2020 presidential campaign, and it feels about right to me, man, what should we expect with respect to transparency in corporate lobbying and spending? So I should give, it's a disclosure agency after all, so I should give full disclosure. I was the jerk who petitioned the SEC in 2011 to develop a rule requiring public companies to disclose their spending of shareholder money on politics. That petition has been the subject of more than 1.3 million comments. It's the most commented petition in the history of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Yeah, I'm real popular in the building. The Congress liked it so much that they placed a rider on our appropriations bill that restricts in fact, it says none of the money in this bill can be used to develop this kind of rule. No, wait, that's not a punchline. That's a law. That happened. So my own view, I've been pretty clear about this. I haven't spoken about it a great deal in office. My own view is that rider's an unhealthy development for the relationship between the Congress and the Commission. Look, there's been a long debate about this petition and my proposal, and people agree, people disagree. We're having a conversation about materiality. I think those are all the right questions. I'm happy to have that debate. I think it is unhealthy for the Congress of the United States to pick and choose and memorialize in the U.S. Code the things we can or can't do, and especially things we can't do, to provide transparency to investors. And I think it's a dangerous road, because after all, both sides can do it. So you can just attach a rider. You can pick the 3 securities laws you don't like and attach a rider and prevent us from providing the market with transparency that it needs. I understand those who oppose the rule in this area. I think I understand why. And of course, the Congress can do what it sees fit. They're Article 1 and there's a reason. But I think more generally, the SEC has earned a deep reputation for thoughtful consideration of these subjects. and that the Congress should not pick and choose the things we want to do on threat of not being able to fund the principal securities regulator of the United States. So my own view is that that law is an unhealthy development for the relationship between the Congress and the Commission. Whether or not you think we should make the rule, I think we should agree about that. Yeah.
Do investors know enough about the abdication of the exchanges regarding corporate governance, and does exchange listing mean less than it used to
Oh, wow.
for investors?
Great questions, man. Do investors know enough about the exchange's abdication of their role in corporate governance? That's a good question. I mean, I gave a speech on it last year, and I think there was, there was a reasonably robust public debate about it. I think if you ask the exchanges, what they'll say is we do a fair bit of regulatory oversight. We just don't do anything on governance anymore, and that's a fair answer. But I think your question is, have we had as candid a conversation we have about that? None of us should engage in the ridiculous fallacy that someday the exchanges will re-engage on this subject. Like, they have no incentive to do it. They have repeatedly refused to do it. They are not going to do it. Now, the question is whether or not someone else should do it, and that's Charles's question and your question, but we should have that conversation. And I'm not sure that investors know enough about it. And it's a really good question. Now, I guess the follow-on to your question would be, should we do something about it? And it's challenging, man, because in the for-profit model, I don't know what to do. Like, fundamentally, if their job is to maximize profits and therefore listings, it's hard for me to, we can cajole, we can suggest, I can give speeches and be mean, they disagree, they sue us, that's okay. But I mean, I look at all that back and forth and it strikes me as really good for lobbyists and lawyers, but not so good for investors. Because we're going to continue to have this back and forth, and they're not going to develop any new corporate governance standards. They have no reason to. So I think what we haven't done in this country is have a conversation about what it means to have for-profit exchanges and what that means for the system we will build for ordinary investors. And I got to say, the chairman and I don't agree about everything, but here I think it's extraordinary leadership. And it's not easy, because the exchanges have been very aggressive. I mean, it's got to be quite a thing to wake up in the morning, open your Wall Street Journal, and read an op-ed from the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange that we're suing you, and here's why. And he has continued to push forward and do the right thing. I'm very proud of the work. My full expectation, he gave a speech on this a couple of weeks ago, is that we're going to continue to push and let investors know what's really happening on stock exchanges. What else? Yes?
You bring up cybersecurity, and the tools that are required to tackle cybersecurity require scale. So things like quantum computing and artificial intelligence
Sure.
require scale. And in markets outside of the U.S., one way that question of scale is tackled is to ensure local competition in favor of global competition, ensure national competition for global competition. Is that something that is gaining traction in the U.S., where you have larger tech companies that are really squashing local competition in favor of competing globally? To name names, companies like Google and Amazon competing with Alibaba and Baidu and Xiaomi. Thoughts?
So, for those of you who didn't hear, it's a really good question. What he's asking is, look, Rob, to do something meaningful about cyber, you need to have scale. Moreover, a lot of these big tech companies are competing, not just in the United States or locally, they're competing with on a massive global scale with enormous competitors, sometimes that have the benefit of significant state support, right? Now here, I think you're right that we're moving in that direction, but here would be my pushback for all of you. One of the hard things about cyber, one of the things that makes it unique as a corporate governance challenge, in my view, is that even though scale is necessary to provide a meaningful defense, the costs of a breach do not scale in the same way. Here's what I mean. You can have significant market players who have exceptional cybersecurity, but if a mid-size or small-size firm, which has less room in their budget to make those investments, is a victim, they could easily have a set of data resources that are far larger and with far larger implications for the rest of the economy, even though they're not a big company. Does that make sense? So my concern, and this is why, to me, it's such a classic case for a disclosure rule. Because what you're trying to do, the genius of the 34 Act is it's a resolution of a collective action problem among firms. It's a standard George Akerlof, Lemons type solution. My concern is if we do nothing more here, what we'll have are big firms that are well protected and mid to small size firms that are not. And when they are a victim, we will all suffer. These are the classic justifications for regulatory intervention to nudge boards in the right direction. Now, whether or not we can do it effectively and exactly how firms will respond, I mean, we'll still have the problem that mid and small size firms will face those issues, but they will have incentives to make hard investment. Why? Because they'll know that if something goes wrong, they have to tell people. That's not my idea. That's not my idea. That's the 34 Act. And that's why I think there's a case for disclosure in this area.
Got room for one more.
Okay. Yes, please, sir.
I think it's reasonable to assume that in the next 2 years there will be increasingly strident discussion of socialism. And I'm wondering what you see as societal dynamics that are occurring right now that will prompt in time meaningful change in the behavior of corporations.
Wow.
That's a heavy question.
Look, it was great talking with all of you today. I hope you enjoyed it.
See, well, let's see what he does.
No, it's a
That
great
way.
question. It's the right question, sir, and I'm happy to end with the question. So his question is, it seems like we're having more and more of a national conversation about socialism. And what do you think will be the thing that spurs change in corporate behavior? So I have two answers to that. The first is we should be careful as a nation. We have history that makes this problem clear. Not to have a situation next year where we call everything we don't like socialism. Because, first of all, it's intellectually lazy. But besides that, it's just a way of yelling. And I don't perceive America in need of new ways of yelling at this moment in our history. If you disagree with somebody, I think it's important to say, we have different intuitions about how the market works, or about wealth distribution, or about what the right thing is to do for the future of our nation. Those are legitimate disagreements. We've had them throughout our history. They're fully contemplated by our constitutional structure, and we have a solution for it. It's called an election. My problem with calling everything we don't like socialism is that it impedes any meaningful discussion on the merits. So a couple of weeks ago, I published a study on the increasing use of buybacks and the degree to which, when executives sell their shares in connection with a buyback, that typically signals that the stock will underperform. And I just released that. That's a fact. And it's, by the way, there's a 1992 Journal of Finance paper on this. Like, this has been a fact forever. And I got invited to go on CNBC to discuss it. And they said, yeah, the topic will be, the buybacks debate, socialism, ? And I was like, so first of all, no thanks. I'm not going to come. And second of all, I understand if you're CNBC and you run Squawk Box, you want to have like a sexy title or whatever. But having an honest conversation about incentives that managers have to do buybacks and the relationship between those incentives and the actual right capital allocation decision, that's not a socialist discussion. That's an ordinary market discussion. That's been going on Wall Street for 20 years. And I think there's real risk in calling everything we don't like or do like socialism. Second, I think fundamentally the debate we're having is over whether American corporations can be part of the solution to some of the problems we perceive in things like our economy and economic dynamics. And here's what I want to say. American history makes this very, very clear. Corporations can be a productive part of that solution, and I think that they will. But the way that they get there is through conversations like these. I think one of the ways that that's happened over the years is people are willing to critique American corporations and have a conversation about whether they're run in a way that makes sense for the nation. I think there's a sense that every time there's an attack or a critique of a corporation, that's war. Hire a lawyer, fight against that. I understand that intuition. But that's not our national history, actually. We had a conversation about corporate control and the appropriate role of corporate governance right after the Depression. Burley and Means wrote their famous text right after that moment. People called them socialists, by the way. For me, this is a part of our national history. And I want to say one more thing about it. The right answers to those questions aren't going to come from Washington. Don't look, I mean, people want to say to me, Rob, you guys should do something, solve gender diversity, solve environment, solve. I think we can nudge in the right direction. I think we're not doing things that we should. I think we're going to look back and wish that we'd done more. That's my own view. But the solution's going to come from all of you. It's going to come in boardrooms. It's going to come from directors, like you said, who ask hard questions and demand the answers, who take hard assignments, who serve on committees that are going to have to make hard decisions. That's where real change has always come in our economy. From corporate boards trying hard to do the right thing, not just for them, not just for their shareholders, not just for today, but for the future of the firm, its career, and its effect on the communities that it's involved in. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to be here today, because the answer to your question, sir, is that conversations like this are going to spur corporations in the right direction, as they always have for the better part of a century, at least in the United States. So that's why it's such a pleasure to have the chance to come talk to you. Thanks for hearing me out today, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Excellent.